Let me just say right at the start that I don't believe in vampires. To me, they're just things you see in the movies or in books. Make-believe and nonsense from a time when people were a bit less enlightened and a lot easier to scare. Now, having said that, I do believe in monsters, especially of the humankind. I also believe wholeheartedly that there are some absolute whack jobs out there who 100% think and believe that they themselves are vampires. Now, what they actually mean by that can vary, all the way from people who just like dressing like every day is an Addams Family reunion party to people who fully believe that they drink the blood of other humans and have to in order to survive. Now, again, to clarify, these people are not vampires because vampires don't exist, but they do believe that they are, and for that reason, they're just as terrifying. Especially if you make your money from a business model that means you're literally forced to invite people into your property. According to the old folklore, so I am reliably informed, a vampire cannot enter into your home unless he or she has been invited. So far, so easy to avoid. Problem is, if like me you own a number of Airbnb apartments and rent them out virtually every day to a ton of different people, you're handing out invitations in digital written form every single day. And while that might not be a problem if you don't believe in vampires, it can be a problem if you have to deal with the people who think they are. A good example of this was last year. I rented one of my apartments out to some guy who asked me at least 3 times during our chat on the Airbnb app whether he was officially invited. I mean, I had to send him a confirmation and everything anyway, but he specifically wanted me to say that he was invited. Because, he said, and I am not making this up, I'm a vampire and I need to be specifically invited to enter a place. He just said it, casually as anything. So I did invite him, over and over. Hey, live and let live. You want to be a vampire? Fine. As long as you pay the bill, knock yourself out. The guy stayed at the apartment for 2 nights. On the second night, I received complaints. Not from my tenant, but from the neighbors both above and adjacent to the apartment. Both of them called me complaining about the noise, that someone in the apartment, allegedly a woman, who according to our agreement shouldn't have been staying there in the first place, was screaming. At first I laughed this off, suggesting to them that maybe this was my guest's lady friend and they were actually just having a good time. This was met by silence from the neighbors before they said quite firmly that this was not the case. "They're not just getting it on," one said. "She sounds terrified or in pain." Still, I decided to give my tenant the benefit of the doubt and didn't go around to check. When no further complaints came, I assumed everything had calmed down and that, as I suspected, the pair were just having some alone time. I didn't hear from the tenant at checkout, so the next day I went around to clean the place, assuming that they had simply checked out and left the key where they were supposed to. Sure enough, though the door was still unlocked, the key was there on the table where I told the guy to leave it. The place was pitch black, and despite it being midday, all the curtains and blinds were drawn, so that I actually stumbled once or twice on my way in. I made a note to chastise him about leaving the door unlocked, but at the time had more pressing concerns. The main problem at that moment was not the unlocked door. It was the smell. A horrible, clinging odor like sour milk or rotten meat that seemed to be in every room. It hadn't been there when I came to clean the time before, and so was obviously caused by this tenant. I again made a note to mention this when doing my feedback and started cleaning. When I moved into the bedroom, I noticed that the smell was even stronger. So I went to search the paneled area under the bed to get some bleach and air fresheners that I had stored in there. What I found instead will stay with me till the end of my days. As I pulled away the panel under the bed frame, I saw not bottles and products or the old mop I kept under there in the dark, but a hand, a human hand of a pale, almost grayish whiteness and covered all over with thick black hair, almost like an animal's. Reeling backwards, I screamed and uselessly threw the products and scrubbing brush I had in my hands at the offending appendage, but the owner of the hand did not move a muscle. Bending down to take a closer look, I found that he was lying perfectly naked in the darkened space below the bed, with only an inch between the tip of his nose and the boards above onto which the mattress was laid. At first, I thought he was dead, but I noticed that in fact he was breathing, slow and shallow. Naturally, I ran from the room and called the police. They told me to leave, lock the door, and wait outside until an officer arrived. When 2 police officers turned up around 10 minutes later, the 3 of us went back into the room. There was no one there. Nobody under the bed. Nobody in any hiding place. Not a sign of anyone, save for the smell. Where he went, I will never know. The police did their best to humor me, but I could tell they thought I made it up. The thing is, though, I didn't. That man was there, all gray-skinned and cold, stuffed under that bed, with the boards close to his face like the lid of a coffin, and some strange dirt scattered all around beneath him. What I wonder and worry about is what his plan was. If I hadn't come to clean, or hadn't checked that space, he would still have been there, laying there and waiting when the next person moved in. When they settled in, and even when they went to bed that night, what might this lunatic, who believed he was a vampire, have done then, in this home he had been invited into? I don't believe in vampires, but some people do, and the fake ones that really believe scare me just as much as if they were real. I had to travel upstate for a work conference and wanted to take my bulldog, Mr. Tubbs, with me. Since there weren't a lot of pet-friendly hotels in the area, I decided to book an Airbnb. I found a pet-friendly option that I could take Mr. Tubbs to. It had good reviews, and the owner, Chester, was friendly and encouraged me to bring my dog along. So I booked the small house, packed up Mr. Tubbs, and brought him along. There wasn't much about the place. It was a 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom house with a kitchen, a living room with a fireplace, and the best feature about the place was the wraparound porch, which overlooked the spacious backyard and wooded area out back. I was looking forward to relaxing with Mr. Tubbs on the porch when I wasn't at work. The first day was great. Chester was there to greet Mr. Tubbs and me and gave us the chef's tour. The house was small but cozy and well made up with antique furniture. There was even a dog bed for Mr. Tubbs, which he took to almost immediately. Looking back on it now, it was almost too good to be true. That evening, I relaxed with dinner and a glass of wine by a crackling fire. Mr. Tubbs hung out in his dog bed and looked like the king of the palace. There were the soothing sounds of the crickets chirping, and I even got to see a herd of deer, a sight I hadn't seen since I was a kid living in the suburbs. All was well until Mr. Tubbs and I went to bed. Mr. Tubbs was content to stay in his new dog bed instead of joining me in the bedroom where his old dog bed was. Anyone who has ever owned an English bulldog knows that arguing with them is like trying to argue with a brick wall, so I didn't push it. I patted him on the head and went to my room. I had just tucked myself into bed and was about to settle into some reading when I heard Mr. Tubbs growling. For the record, this was the first time I had ever heard Mr. Tubbs growling. The most threatening sound he had ever made was a snort when I told him no. Sensing something was wrong, I went into the living room to see what was upsetting my dog. Mr. Tubbs was standing at the French doors that led to the backyard, staring at something only he could see. I turned on the lights and tried to see outside, but could only see our reflections in the glass. When I tried to open the doors, Mr. Tubbs blocked me from opening the door. He looked at me with that stubborn old bulldog face. I was convinced that something out there was disturbing him, and decided to turn off the lights so I could get a better look without our reflections distorting the glass. Sure enough, in front of the tree line was the figure of a man. He looked much bigger than me. I grabbed the fireplace poker with one hand and my phone with the other and sat down on the couch. I don't know how long we sat there in the dark. I do remember it felt like hours. Mr. Tubbs became a guard dog, watching whoever was threatening us, growling in a low voice. Finally, he barked and charged at the glass. When I looked up to see what was scaring him, I noticed that the figure was just outside the house, looking through right at me. I jumped up, made sure the doors were locked, and called the police. The figure banged on the glass door so hard that I feared the glass would shatter. Mr. Tubbs barked and growled, throwing himself against the glass. I tried calling Mr. Tubbs off, but he ignored me, not stopping until the flashing red and blue lights of the police cars lit up the driveway. The figure stopped and ran back to the tree line. He disappeared into the woods. The police searched the woods, but they never caught sight of anyone who could have been there. I spent the rest of the night in the bedroom with my door bolted and Mr. Tubbs right by my side. I don't think either of us got any sleep. The next day I called Chester and apologized, but I couldn't stay in the house anymore. Chester was apologetic, refunding me the rest of the money for my stay and convincing his friend, who also owned an Airbnb in the area, to let Mr. Tubbs and I spend the rest of our stay there. I still shudder, thinking of how I might have been the victim of God knows what. If I hadn't had Mr. Tubbs with me, well, I don't think I want to know what would have happened. Airbnb has never been something that I'm fond of. There's something about the fact that I'm staying in a stranger's home that didn't sit well with me. Even as a kid, I hated sleepovers with a burning passion. Well, when I met my wife, that changed. We were like polar opposites. I wanted the comfort and safety of routine, and she craved adventure. To keep the peace, we compromised. Every month, we would take a mini trip, like a staycation, to make it to where she got the adventure she wanted, and we got to spend time away from the kids. After being married for several years, it helped our marriage tremendously. It wasn't always like that, though. One of our first trips, we made it to a place where we never wanted to go out again. My wife had been eyeballing a hiking trail for nearly 3 months before I decided to surprise her with a trip for one of our monthly outings. The trail would loop around at a waterfall, and it had several little antique shops around. After checking the motels and hotels around, I quickly learned that they were few and far in between. Not wanting to admit defeat, I sucked it up and turned to Airbnb. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but then one posting stuck out to me. It was gorgeous and available. The home was a simple 1-bedroom and 1-bathroom cabin-style home, tucked away right at the entry of the park. It was perfect, but I should have known. It was too perfect. I surprised my wife by simply telling her to pack and me driving there, leaving her clueless until we made it far enough along that she had formed her own conclusion. When we made it inside, it was even more beautiful. It had a fireplace and a very cozy feeling to it. The first day we took our time and toured the little shops and grabbed dinner before returning to the cabin with wine and a movie, ready to just enjoy the evening. However, it was different when we arrived this time. It wasn't as inviting when we walked in. The warmth was nearly sucked out of the home as if it was by force. It was cold and dark, lonely, even oppressive. I could tell my wife felt it too, just by the way her face fell into a sad, limp frown. Not wanting to worry her more, I quickly pulled her into a hug and spun her around, telling her to go hop in the shower, and I'd get things ready for our relaxing time. She nodded and pranced away like nothing was wrong. I had just sat down on the couch with a glass of Merlot when, from out of nowhere, the lights went completely out. I heard a loud bang from towards the back of the house where the bathroom was. I don't think I had ever moved that fast in my life, but I was up and moving within a second. Moments before I reached the door, my wife screamed. I was running up, and she was running out, effectively colliding in the middle. When we hit each other, I grasped my hands around her to simply steady us both. Her hair was dripping wet. Her eyes showed a terrified blue that I'd never seen in our years of marriage. When I asked her what happened, she tried to collect her thoughts, and right as she seemed prepared to answer, she just told me that she was likely paranoid, and the lights going out scared her a bit. Not wanting to work her up again, I agreed before we went to the living room and settled down. Both of us were now clutching the wine glass stems a bit too tight, might I say. As we sat there, neither of us mentioned what had just transpired not even 2 hours earlier. We both wanted to pretend it was nothing, but before long, it became clear that wasn't going to happen at all. I had my wife's legs in my lap, and it was well beyond dark by then. Beside us was surrounded by rows of windows that led out into a dark, inky night. It was in the split second of turning my head that I caught a glimpse of what appeared to be an elderly man standing outside of the cabin windows. He was clearly older than 50, with sagging jowls and sideburns that put Elvis to shame. It startled me enough that I nearly fell from the sofa had my wife not been helping me stay in place. As soon as she was up, though, I went and flipped the outside light. I held my breath, waiting to see who was creeping outside the door. I felt the adrenaline coursing, nagging me on to do something, protect my wife, anything but stand there. However, when the light lit up the surroundings, there was nothing at all. Not even a rogue possum. Nothing looked touched, but as we stood there, the outside motion light caught on. We both stood as if we were statues, waiting. With us still looking outside with bated breath, we were unprepared for what followed. Our guards were down on the inside, because the threat seemed to come from outside. Or so we thought. We were taken aback when the temperature in the cabin jilted once more. Forget the fireplace and cozy attire. The place turned into a freezer. The only place that was warm was behind us. Right behind us. It felt like a furnace in just that one spot. Not just a typical furnace, though. No, it felt like it radiated anger. Even I started to get unreasonably angry. There was no stopping it, though. I was just mad. I wanted to throw my fists. My wife must have sensed it because I even felt her start to shift away from me. I just wanted to get away as quickly as possible. Before even questioning it, I turned on my heels and walked back to the couch, sitting down with my head in my hands. I didn't want to be the reason for our trip to end, so I vowed that we'd not go anywhere until my wife called it off. When I emerged from my stupor, she seemed back to relative normality, and instead of pushing through the last bit of our movie, we both decided to just turn in. We both hoped that the next day would be better. Neither of us managed to fight sleep for too long, though. We were worn out. Likely we would have slept all night, had it not been for one minor inconvenience. A horrible odor that smelled like straight sulfur, or even a dead skunk, one of the two. It wafted into our bedroom, choking us. Gagging, we both shot up, and when we did, we came face to face with the man from the window earlier in the evening. His face looked the same, except I could get a better view of the expression. Rage. His eyes were dark and empty. This time, he wasn't outside of the window. He was in the cabin, right outside of the bedroom door. My wife yelled to go away, but he just stood. He wasn't solid, more of a mist type figure. The sneer was real enough for us, though. As we watched, still stifled by the horrible odor, our bedroom door slammed close. The force was enough that it caused the pictures to rattle on their nails, and the sound reverberated throughout the whole thing. I wish we could say we were intrigued enough to investigate, but that's not us. Without her even saying anything, we reached for our luggage at the same time. Our trip ended early, and we left right then, driving 2 towns over for a Holiday Inn. While there, we got to talk to the receptionist, who informed us that this wasn't the first time she'd heard this story. Apparently, a few weeks before us, another couple came in with the same details. Something tells me it was the same home, but either way, since then, we've avoided Airbnb. We decided to risk dingy hotels instead of haunted homes.